I suppose this is overdue. I've been wondering when to start posting again to this channel. I've been posting to my other channels, but quite frankly, I needed a break from Point Reyes. It's sad that such a wonderful national park is also such a source of heartache, and it's a really depressing situation. And other people out there working on this know what I'm talking about. But with the recent announcement of supposedly looking into bringing down the fence, people have been messaging me asking me what I think about it. In short, I don't buy it. Secondly, it's not good news unless the ranchers are gone. Now, those are opinionated statements, and I'm basing that upon my experience working with the Park Service or communicating with the Park Service and seeing the history of what has happened out there. But that's still an opinion. Do I have anything that I can reflect on historically that might tell us whether or not this is good news for the elk or whether it's even going to happen at all? The first thing I want to reference is my interview with Melanie Gunn of the Point Reyes National Park Service. This was a painful interview to endure as she spit off without breathing almost her well-rehearsed lines that the Park Service has taught her. But at one point in the interview, she said, look, even if the fence came down and the ranchers were gone, we would have to kill the elk. Okay. Taken for those words alone, that doesn't sound like good news for the elk. So even if those of us who are fighting to restore the seashore and actually get the Park Service to fulfill the mandates that they are supposed to have been fulfilling for the last 50 years or so, according to her, it's still going to be bad news for the elk. Now we have to enter in the factor that the ranchers aren't gone. The fence is just coming down. And the reason the fence exists in the first place is the ranchers. Period. Period. So if the ranchers are still there, but the conflict that caused the fence to exist in the first place is still there, why would that not set off a warning in your head? I'm going to stick on this topic a little bit longer because what did Melanie Gunn mean when she said they would kill the elk anyway? Well, we've got to manage the population. We humans always need to be in charge and on top and important and managing the population of other animals as we see fit, not as nature sees fit and not as a healthy ecosystem sees fit, but as we have decided it should be, which means wildlife next to nothing, livestock take over the planet. Why would humans have to manage this population? Well, her excuse, there are no predators to naturally manage this population. Well, why not? We're in a national park. If ever we were going to have predators to manage a population, one would hope it could be here. The most blaring answer is the ranchers. Why are predators gone in the first place? Because of their conflict with animal agriculture. The conflict with agriculture is so extreme between nature and this industry that even herbivores pose a threat to the finances of this industry. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about killing elk or having a fence for the elk. If herbivores are a threat to an animal agriculture industry because they might eat some of the same grass or some of the same plants or some of the same water, well, my God, clearly wildlife that are carnivorous and could kill some of these commodity animals are not going to be allowed. So we're not going to allow carnivores back to manage the population until ranchers are gone. And we might not allow carnivores back even if the ranchers are gone, because humans have become accustomed to a false ecosystem in which these predators don't exist. Instead of understanding how to exist with them and behave in a smart way, we pretty much can just go lollygagging around through Point Reyes from one end to the other without really worrying about ever encountering anything that we might consider to be scary. Extending beyond Point Reyes, well, what's the number one reason that we don't have very many predators, or for that matter, herbivores left in the United States of America? Once again, it is animal agriculture. Okay, so the same problem that exists within the park, catering to an industry that is not nature friendly, extends beyond the park. And the extension beyond the park is the excuse that Melanie Gunn is using for why they would have to kill them inside of the park. We can't let them expand beyond the park. Oh my God, how horrifying. Wildlife recovering. It's amazing in a really messed up way to have that sort of a conversation with Park Service staff. You would hope that they, if anyone, in this brainwashed society to where, screw nature, money's more important, one would hope that they would be the ones fighting for nature. No, no, no. They are the ones defending the industry that causes them to fail miserably at their own mandate of restoring and preserving. Now, does Melanie Gunn know what she's talking about? I guess that depends on what you mean by knows what she's talking about. Is she smart or ecologically minded? I would say no. Does she know what she's supposed to say, like an obedient robotic servant to the industry she works for? Yeah, otherwise she wouldn't have her job anymore. So she knows what to say, as it is told to her to say. Will they change their mind about what they said? Absolutely, because they do it and they've done it repeatedly. Now I want to jump back to an event that occurred in which an activist, or a terrorist, as the Park Service referred to them, sawed down some of the fence. Now, how do we know that that wasn't me or someone that I work with? The number one reason is that it was not a good move. And no one that I know personally would have done that because it's not very smart. Here are all the things wrong with the person, whether they meant good things or not. Here are all the things wrong with what that person did. They sawed down the fence and then left it laying on the ground. That created an entanglement situation for the elk. Two, they did it next to the road where the Park Service would see it immediately. And if the Park Service is ever going to spend resources on the park, it's to inhibit wildlife. Their spendings on fences and barbed wire and protecting the ranchers far exceeds any accomplishment they've made toward preserving or restoring. So guess what? That fence was restored quickly. Now, if whoever did that had been going out with us, they would have understood that the Park Service staff really don't spend much time out there despite their claims. And if they had simply sawed down the fence somewhere else, they might have, like way far out into the wilderness area, it might have accomplished something and lasted longer. But now we come all the way back to the real problem, and that's this absurd assumption that the ranchers won't take matters into their own hands. And I have to also mention the people I've interviewed who are on the fence about whether or not they want to go on record, not because they're not telling the truth, but out of the fear of the backlash from this Marin Mafia, known as Good American People, the ranchers, are already killing the elk. The idea that these ranchers aren't already killing the elk takes quite a leap of faith. Now, I have interviewed a ranch hand who has told me about ranchers killing wildlife, but hey, you don't have to believe him. After all, he was interviewed by me. Clearly, I have an agenda, and the person who spoke up was probably just on my payroll. We have the elk expert who has been following Tule elk in California for 30 plus years, who says that the population of elk outside of the fence, where they aren't forced to poison themselves out of desperation of eating plants because there's no good forage over there, and who are dying of dehydration, no matter what the Park Service lies to you about. They have crap for water and they have crap for food, and they call it a paradise of Tomales Point. The elk outside of there, the Limatour elk, the Drake's Beach herd, well, they are not multiplying at the rate or even close to the rate that they would naturally be multiplying. How? Gee, that's interesting. The elk inside the reserve reach, quote unquote, their carry capacity very quickly, as pieces of crap like Feinstein or Huffman will quickly refer to without having a clue about what a natural carry capacity is. Oh, that sounds official. Let's tell the public that the damned elk met their carry capacity and now they deserve to die. They met a carry capacity because they are fenced into an area in an incredibly unnatural manner. By the way, that elk reserve, the Park Service hasn't done shit to make it better, other than the initial act of removing the cattle. And the direction that the Park Service has been leaning in recent years, right up until this sudden turnaround, you would think that they're ready to reintroduce cattle there, if anything. But the invasive plants that the very people that they support, the ranchers, not only spread accidentally, but intentionally plant, intentionally propagate within a national seashore, a national park unit, are getting worse in the reserve. Where are the signs of the Park Service trying to improve the forage for the elk within the reserve, trying to increase, forget the elk for just a second, everything's about the elk. What about the rest of the wildlife that would benefit from an increase in the native plants and a decrease in the invasive plants? And the chain, the trophic cascade that would take place just by putting in the correct producers, the plants, down at the bottom of this trophic pyramid that would benefit all the other native wildlife. Where are the signs of that effort at? Oh, there aren't any. Why? They're busy tending to the ranchers. They're true employers. And we're paying the salary. We're paying the salary. But the true employers are the ranchers who control Huffman, Feinstein, the Park Service, and apparently your minds, because it takes a leap of faith to think that what is happening in that Park Service is anything short of criminal. Living, breathing criminals are praised by the community because these living, breathing criminals are what we consider to be good people. Why? Because of your personal experience with them? No, because we've been indoctrinated to think that anyone who works out in the country with their hands can't possibly be doing anything wrong. And by work out in the country with their hands, we mean exploit migrant labor and not do it themselves. We have Home Ranch, for example, decorating their property with the skulls of elk. Now, could they have just found those elk skulls? Sure. Is it an encouraging sign that people who declare elk a problem and a threat to their very livelihood are decorating their property with the skulls of those same animals? I don't know how much of a leap of faith toward believing those are good people do you want to take? Those are the same people who somehow magically didn't know that chopping down native plants and bulldozing dirt into a riparian area wasn't illegal, even though they've been there for freaking generations. But, suddenly, we don't know where we are or what we're doing or if it's illegal. But why would they? They won't get punished. They never get punished. Because the Park Service are their employees that you pay the salary for. I know that's confusing, but that's just the way it is. It's a facade that they are there for us, public servants, but they are in fact servants of the ranchers. We have the witnesses who have seen the elk intentionally driven into barbed wire fences. By the way, not wildlife-friendly fences. I mean, we have private ranches outside of Point Reyes National Seashore that have adhered to wildlife-friendly fences before the Park Service has adhered to wildlife-friendly fences. So we still have horrifying entanglements of wildlife because the Park Service, well, they can't be bothered to care for the wildlife. Not when they're working for the ranchers. They're busy putting up new illegal fencing. We have the records. What was it? It's so depressing. I put it out of my mind, but I was working on the film last year. Going out and killing, shooting healthy elk with the excuse of testing for Johne's disease. I'm not talking about going and killing the ones behind the fence. I'm talking about the free roaming ones that, well, there might be a spread of Johne's disease, which is linked to the dairy industry. There might be a spread of Johne's disease from those damned filthy wildlife to our really clean operation of animals living in confined areas, forced to walk on their own feces, drop their babies on top of piles of poop. It's so wonderful, these industries. But it's definitely the disgusting wildlife that are spreading disease. What was God thinking? What was Mother Nature thinking? All we needed was these ranchers to come along and show us that bulldozing plants and replacing it with shit and dirt was the way to go. What was the body count? I think the Pacific Sun, just from the ones that they acquired, was like 30 elk shot, pregnant females shot, healthy males shot. None of them tested positive for Johne's disease, according to the necropsies. A report went out that said that some did. The necropsies don't show it. But whatever excuse you want to use, call them the most disease-ridden animals on the planet. They already have been getting murdered by the Park Service and the ranchers. Stop talking about this like it's something that might happen in the future. It's already happened and is probably happening as we speak, right before the ranchers and the Park Service go sit down to their elk steak dinner together. The conflict with wildlife begins with the ranchers, the industry that is anti-nature. I know Marin Conservation League and Audubon and all these other fucking ranch servants say shit like, oh, it's a marriage of wildlife and agriculture. No, it's not. The separation couldn't be clearer. It's death and then suddenly life. Point Reyes National Seashore is beautiful where there isn't ranching and where all the residual effects of ranching haven't taken over, just as a passive side effect of introducing constantly non-native species. And when I say a non-native species, I'm talking about the plants, I'm talking about the commodity animals, I'm talking about the Homo sapiens. We, in fact, are non-native invasive species that just effed it all up once we got there. So stop looking at history as though history began when the people that effed everything up arrived. They effed it all up. And now you want to use that as a point in time to base ecology on? No. What you're looking at is nature surviving despite being inflicted with constant harm. As long as that is there, how can you possibly hope good things for the elk? That park staff, if the ranchers go and the fence goes, that park staff has to go. You got to start from scratch. You got to start with some people that haven't had a 50-year relationship with the enemy. You know, they brag about it. They're happy to talk about their relationship with the ranchers and that the relationship with the ranchers is necessary for the existence of the seashore. No. These leases that we, the taxpayers, continue to subsidize and the damage that continues to take place within the park is all because of the continued existence of the ranchers and the relationship between Point Reyes National Seashore and those ranchers. So stop celebrating that relationship. It's disgusting and it's corrupt. And the elk will not be safe until we wipe the slate clean. Let's get an indigenous burn out there that wipes it clean of the Park Service and the ranchers. Then we might finally see a healthy ecosystem that can support elk across the entire seashore, as was the original intent. Yoni's disease. I can't leave the topic of Yoni's disease quite yet because this is really interesting. Now, the elk that have been over behind the fence, where at least they're safe from the disease-ridden cattle and the fecal matter that covers every square inch of the ranching sector of that seashore. Now, if the fence comes down, they're going to be exposed to the cattle. Two things will happen. The elk will, in fact, get exposed to and infected with Yoni's disease. And even if not, they will be blamed for any future tests. They were already blamed for the tests and incorrectly and unjustifiably murdered, literally murdered for the suspicion of spreading Yoni's disease, despite the common knowledge that Yoni's disease comes hand in hand with the dairy industry. Anyway, if you don't like this sort of raw content, this is the time to unsubscribe because I'm not going to get any more pleasant. I spent so much time ranting about how the elk might actually be worse off when the fence comes down that I neglected the other point that this might not be happening at all. This might be a distraction tactic. This is a way to get heat off of the Park Service. And what do I have to base that upon? Well, how about the fact that in all the years that the Park Service has been operating out there, they have not made progress toward removing that elk fence or improving the habitat that those elk are forced to live within until the public got a little sick of it with the droughts and people becoming aware of the conditions of trapped animals in a drought. And then even then, they just gave lip service that they were going to help. They didn't, and elk died again. And then the next set of droughts arrived, and this time around, people were a little bit more adamant. There was public exposure, there were protests, and even then, the Park Service said, "No, you're wrong. There's no problem." Even as elk are dying, even as the footage of the elk dying is being released, even as there are lawsuits against them, they literally fought in court not to help the elk. And then one day they brought the water out. And they brought the water out to the place where the elk, I would say, needed the water the least and neglected the area that they needed it the most, while simultaneously saying that the elk did not need water and that they did need forage. But they refused to bring forage, did bring water that they claimed the elk didn't need. But really what you need to focus on is that they did not do what they said the elk needed. Therefore, their intentions were not for the elk. Their goal was not to help the elk. The goal was to get pressure off their backs, and they had succumbed to public shaming on a national level. The fact that the Park Service would do something just to get heat off of themselves is a reason for you to suspect that this talk about bringing the elk fence down might not be true. And if it is true, then we go back to point number one, that you would be changing from passive murder in the form of allowing them to starve from a lack of food and a lack of water to direct murder in the form of shooting and culling and testing for Yoni's disease.